Welcome to the Metropolitan Club. I'm Mindy Wright, a member of CMC's Board of Trustees, and it's great to see you all here so engaged with each other. Today, CMC presents the Charles Y. and Francis N. Lazarus Legacy Forum, Columbus Aviation, Rich History, New Horizons, supported by the Dispatch Media Group and in partnership with Columbus Landmarks Foundation and Preserving Original Columbus Airport Terminal. Won't you please help me thank them all? A growing city must be connected to the world, and since the dawn of aviation in the early 20th century, Ohio has held a prominent role in the evolution of flight and passenger travel, and it's just a coincidence that my last name is Wright and I'm up here today. Now, as we consider a thriving economy and growing international interest in our region, there exists the potential to take the next step. Let's explore these issues and opportunities with our experts. Please welcome Director, Global Sales, East Region and Strategic Sales for Delta Airlines, Air France, KLM Royal Dutch Airlines, Alitalia, and Virgin Atlantic, David Stratchko. Vice President of Global Transportation and Logistics for Ascena Retail Group Inc, Debbie Ryan. Columbus Regional Airport Authority CEO Joe Nardone. And our host today, journalist with the Columbus Dispatch, Marla Rose. Nancy Recchie, co-owner of the Benjamin D. Rickey Company, will start us off with a brief history of Columbus Aviation and then turn things over to Marla for our program.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be invited to give a 5-minute overview of the significance of Columbus in terms of national aviation history. So it's really hard for me to talk for only 5 minutes, but with Andy's help, we're going to go through the slides and we will definitely stay on the 5 minutes, I promise. There's a PowerPoint presentation here. You also can download it, so if you want to look down, that's fine. Starting with Port Columbus and why it's so significant. It was built from the ground up to be part of the first transcontinental air route in the nation. The airline was TAT, Transcontinental Air Transport, which was the precursor for TWA, which was one of the early legacy airlines. The initial idea of Port Columbus was really promoted by a number of civic leaders. They literally wanted to put Columbus on the map. They saw the future. They saw that airlines after World War I were going to be important, and they wanted to have passenger service. Among those were Don Casto Sr., Robert F. and Harry P. Wolfe, who were publishers of the Dispatch, and others. They advocated that Columbus be a part of this important first route, which would shorten the time between New York City and Los Angeles from 4 days to 48 hours. Those of you who sometimes take flights that seem like they last a long time, think about that was a huge improvement to go transcontinental at the time. It was conceived originally as a rail and air route combined, necessitated by being able to fly during the day and have to travel by train overnight. Early supporters were General Motors, making the engines, Pennsylvania Railroad, because they were the ones that transported the passengers part of the way, and Charles Lindbergh, who added a lot of credibility to the idea in this venture. Other airlines forming at the time were looking at passenger service, but many of them were also looking basically as U.S. mail routes and cargo service, not really believing that there would be a huge market for passenger airlines anytime soon. The Port Columbus terminal was designed by Allied Architects, Inc. It was a group of actually the city's major architects that came together rather than competing for civic jobs. They came together, they created this Allied Architects. They designed both the hangar and the terminal. They also designed Columbus City Hall, so it gives you an idea of that time frame. This was in the 1920s. This was civic architecture, civic improvements for the city. The inaugural flight was on July 8, 1929. Among the dignitaries present for that first flight were Henry Ford, Charles Lindbergh, and Amelia Earhart. And what was so significant about it, Columbus was where passengers actually got on the airplane for the first time. They traveled overnight from Penn Station in New York City on a special train called the Airway Limited. You can go one more, the Airway Limited. An American Heritage article about the route described Port Columbus as a specially built air rail facility outside Columbus, Ohio, the only one of its kind in the world. TAT planes were named after the cities along the route, including the city of Columbus, which was flown by Charles Lindbergh. The detailed flight schedule, the detailed flight schedule, I love the way it described this whole experience. By the Airway Limited to Columbus, from Columbus soar like the eagle. And it gave very detailed information about where you stopped along the way. And there were no nonstop flights. These were very short hops. They had to refuel. These were small planes. And they visited a number of cities along the way. Just a little bit of trivia. People sometimes ask why we have our airport CMH. CMH stands for Columbus Municipal Hangar, so now you all know. It all dates back to that historic hangar that's sitting there on the airport property. Another first took place. This terminal actually served as the main terminal for Port Columbus until 1958, and there was a lot of expansion of air traffic in the city at the time, and that's when it became excess property. Still standing today, looking very much like it did, at least on the exterior at the time it was completed. Another first for Port Columbus took place in 1946 when the late Alex Boudreaux became the first African-American air traffic controller in the nation. My husband and son and I had the opportunity to have lunch with Mr. Boudreaux about 20 years ago, and he told a truly remarkable story. You've heard of the Tuskegee Airmen. I know all of you have, and we have another important part of our history at Rickenbacker, which was Lockbourne at the time, that I'm not talking about today. But Alex Boudreaux was born and raised in far southern Louisiana. He told us he didn't speak English until he got to school. He spoke a southern Louisiana dialect. He dreamed of becoming a pilot. Tuskegee opened the pilot training during World War II. He took a test to be admitted, and he flunked the test. He wasn't dispirited, he was determined. He knew what he didn't know. He learned what he didn't know. He went home, decided he would get books, teach himself. He could not go to his public library because he was African American. He convinced a white friend to check out all the books he needed. He studied, he entered Tuskegee, and he became a pilot at age 21. When he moved into air traffic control following the war, he served his entire career at Port Columbus as the first African-American air traffic controller in the country. He retired in 1977 and received the Congressional Medal of Honor in 2007. Another first occurred in 1964. Some of you may remember this, when Jerry Mauck, who was known as a Bexley housewife, made aviation history when she became the first woman to fly solo around the world. Her successful flight on a little single-engine Cessna 180 named Spirit of Columbus began and ended at Port Columbus. She flew 22,860 miles, with 29 stops in under 30 days, and documented her experiences in her book, 38 Charlie, referencing the call numbers for her plane. The Works Museum in Newark, Ohio, if you haven't been there, they have a wonderful exhibit about Jerry Mauck and her accomplishments. And finally, Port Columbus was the home of the first private jet aircraft management and charter business in the world in 1964. Known at the time as Executive Jet Airways, it's known all over the world today as NetJets. It had an interesting history with Generals Curtis LeMay and Paul Tibbets Jr., who was the pilot of the Enola Gay, and entertainers Jimmy Stewart and Arthur Godfrey as founding members. I never knew Jimmy Stewart and Arthur Godfrey were actually pilots, and they were actually, part of their executive jet was to target people in the entertainment industry. The company was the very first to use new 6-passenger Learjet aircraft. There was a bit of a scandal, however, when CEO Brigadier General Dick Lassiter was indicted for diverting millions of Penn Central Railroad funds, at the time Penn Central owned the airline, into the business. It never went anywhere because he passed away before it ever went to trial, but it is an interesting part of our history. And I'm going to end very briefly with just a little bit of trivia before we get on to the present. I know most of the people in this room travel a lot, and over the years, one of the parts of a flight attendant's uniform has tended to be a scarf. In TWA in 1974 created new uniforms. It was a very big deal, and when they unveiled the scarf, which I happen to have, my husband bought it for me a couple of years ago. They were celebrating the history of the airline, and what's truly remarkable about this, and you might be able to see it there, there is in the very bottom corner is the Aero Saarinen designed iconic structure at TWA at JFK Airport. One of the most beautiful buildings in the world is that tiny bottom right. Next to it was a Lockheed L-1011, which was the flagship plane for TWA in 1974. In the middle is a great big plane that says the Lindbergh Line, TWA, a historic plane, and that entire top part of that beautiful scarf is none other than Port Columbus Airport. Now, what's interesting about this, I saw this online, what's interesting about it, go look it up for yourselves. People who are selling these can describe 3 of the things. Nobody has any idea what that top part is. So what we need to do is not only preserve and reuse this historic terminal, we need to make sure people in Columbus and people elsewhere understand what an important part we played in national aviation history. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Marla Rose from the Dispatch. And, well, we have a quite interesting range of people here. Joe Nardone just took over as the director of the Airport Authority relatively recently. How long have you been here now? 6 months?
We're 16.
Oh, not even?
So
Okay.
4, yeah.
Okay, wow.
But it's kind of busy.
And you came from Detroit, and we talked a bit about coming from a much larger airport, much larger in terms of the number of flights, number of passengers. I'm wondering if you could maybe give your elevator speech that, you know, if someone asked you about the opportunity you see here in Columbus for the airports and what brought you here.
Thank you, Marla. I appreciate that. First of all, thank you all for allowing me to be here and speak with you this afternoon. I want to start by recognizing some of the most important reason I'm here. I have 3 board members here who I visited with, and can you guys wave? Bill, Kathy, Paul? These 3 are the reason, and the reason I'm in Columbus, I like to say this, is because Columbus has charisma. I can tell you that nowhere that I've been has such great interaction, such great cooperation between the business community, the political community, it's just an unbelievable experience here, and people have been unbelievably warm and welcoming to me here, so thank you for all of that. As it relates to why I decided to come here, other than my wonderful board members, it's really about growth. I see opportunities here that I didn't see anywhere else in the country. Detroit is a great airport. I enjoyed my time there. It's, as I said to Marla, it's built. Okay, we have a lot of opportunities to grow this place, whether it's air service, whether it's economic development. The airlines are so important to us. Delta is here, Southwest is here today with us. They have supported our growth at this airport, and the long and short of my decision-making was it's all about Columbus. I'm really excited to be here.
And in terms of, most of us interact with the airport mostly through John Glenn Airport. in terms of the passenger service, but also we spoke about the opportunity at Rickenbacker, and that I don't know if you've been watching the numbers, but we've been having strong growth. John Glenn is on track to have its biggest year ever in terms of number of passengers. And Rickenbacker has been through the roof in terms of the growth there.
It's been a great time to be here, Marla, and can everybody from the airport wave their hand? This is really their credit. They're the ones that deserve this.
All right.
But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that it's all about the economy and it's all about the private sector investment. The airlines sometimes don't get recognized for what they do for the economy. The folks down at Rickenbacker, Debbie to my left, the folks that are the private sector investment is what makes this all work. And we thank them for that, and we want to be here to serve them and make sure that they're successful.
Debbie, as long as we're talking about Rickenbacker, I imagine most of us don't know as much about the cargo side. I'm wondering, being with Ascena, being a major user of Rickenbacker, and you were telling me this is really the base in terms of the distribution for all of your stores, correct?
Yes, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here to represent Ascena. Ascena Retail is a $6.5 billion specialty retailer with many names that you will all recognize, such as Ann Taylor, Loft, the Justice brand, Lane Bryant, Dress Barn, and others. We operate 4,800 stores nationwide. And we have two buildings in the Midwest here, one in Pataskala, Ohio, just about 20 miles east of town, or Etna as we like to call it. It is a multi-channel building, meaning that it distributes retail goods to brick and mortar stores as well as fulfilling e-commerce orders online. Also in the Midwest, we have a state-of-the-art e-commerce fulfillment center in Greencastle, Indiana, about 30 miles west of Indianapolis. Our third building is in Riverside, California, and it is also a multi-channel building for both brick and mortar and e-commerce, and this gives us a lot of flexibility in fulfilling our customers' orders. Logistically speaking, all of our air freight nationwide to fulfill customer e-commerce orders as well as brick and mortar flows through our Columbus building. A lot of that travels on charters that come into Rickenbacker. In 2017, we imported 11 million kilos of air freight in total, and about 4 million of that came right through Rickenbacker on the 5 different airlines that call directly from virtually every major port across Asia. So once the goods come into our building in Pataskala, then we flow them out to the other buildings for fulfillment to customers. But we've been a Rickenbacker customer now for about 6 years, working with the various air freight forwarders that connect us to the airlines and bring our cargo in there.
And could you just say briefly what it is about Columbus, why Columbus rather than another city that has this base for you?
I think the one word that immediately comes to mind is geography, because we can reach more than 85% of the U.S. population within 2 business days from here. It also has a very broad-based logistics skill set here. We can find the talent that we need to run our buildings, but a lot of it does go back to geography.
And David works for Delta on the passenger side. For those of us that do fly a lot, Delta has grown. I think you were saying before the program started, what's the growth been just the past 5 years or so?
Yeah, this is well, good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here and join this esteemed group and have the opportunity. So the airline, we were talking about how fascinating this business is, the airline industry, and it's one thing about it, it's you can count on change. It happens on a regular basis. It never gets dull, never gets boring. And Delta has been a part of Columbus for, in fact, next year, Jan 18th, I believe it is, we'll be celebrating our 60th anniversary of service to Columbus Airport. So, needless to say, we are committed to the market, and if we use 2013 as a baseline, we've grown our capacity here about 25%. And a lot of that's, of course, we've added service, we've added change of gauge on airplanes, and so that's how we're continuing to grow in this market, and that's not stopping for the short term. So the trajectory is on that path, and again, 60 years and many more to come. So we're excited to be here, and the support has been tremendous, and we always look for how do we continue to deepen the partnerships and relationships within the community. So,
And I'm just curious how you would express, because what most of us watch for, everybody wants more service, and everybody has their, cities that they have relatives in or they travel to frequently, and, everybody wants Delta or, another airline to add flights to X or more flights to Y, or, So if you could just briefly tell us how has that decision, has how you decide that changed in recent years? And, what are the factors in terms of, we were talking about kind of the chicken and the egg factor, that, that airlines need the demand to be there, and people want the flights to be there so they can generate demand, and, it's kind of this push-pull.
absolutely, yeah. In fact, I wish in advance, we talked about it before the luncheon started, I wish we had a card we can pass out, and everybody just put the city they would like to see, and we'd hold it up. That'd be a really good idea of where we're going, see how many are common. But, we have a very robust network planning department, and there's a lot of data and a lot of information that we look at to make sure that we're putting the flights into the markets where they will be sustainable. Last thing we want to be is schizophrenic. Put a flight in, take it back out. If it's not working, that doesn't work for the community, does not work for the airline. So when we put it in, we want to make sure that it will, maybe on the short term, it won't hit, we know where the projections are going to be. They're going to hit them at a certain point, and we know what the long term is. We know how many passengers are traveling in and out of this airport. We know where they're going. And so we, of course, with Delta and all the major airlines, when they look at it, there's a hub and spoke system. And being able to get people here in this community from Columbus to anywhere in the world using Delta through our hubs and connecting on Delta or our joint venture partners, and get you to anywhere in the world. Increasing service here, we have over 800 airplanes, and it's we call them, it's our factory, basically, and deploying that factory where it's going to be the most economical. And on average, we're about 85% load factor. Out of Columbus, just for numbers' sake, it's about, on average, 77% load factor, taking all of the flights into consideration, which is very strong. So the support here is great. And we look at how do we get, when we look at a market, like, for example, we started LA, we know there's a lot of passengers per day going to whichever market. They may be connecting, they may be on nonstop. So it's looking at the load factors and finding out, okay, if there's a lot of people connecting from Columbus to get to LA, perhaps a nonstop flight can be supported because we know the volume going to that market. And that helps us determine, but for the most efficient way is really to look at the equipment and upgauging equipment, going from a 150 seats airplane to a 190 seat airplane and putting that capacity to carry more people to these markets. Mm-hmm. Long-winded answer, but hopefully that helps.
And a load factor, just for those of us that don't know, is the percentage of the airplane that's full, basically.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And obviously, it's interesting. So data has changed your ability to do your job. And I don't know if you follow the airline industry, but after a number of quite rough years, with fuel prices and different things, it seems like data is one of the things that really has helped you operate more efficiently. You were talking about the use of data to make all your decisions about the routes and things.
Exactly. And what's helpful to us, while we have a lot of data and we can look forward in some respects, we have obviously the historical data, there's things that happen. We were chatting about the economic development here within the Columbus marketplace in the catchment area. When there's, and we of course watch it and find out if there's companies that are earmarking Columbus, if it's in a final list for moving a headquarters. That is something that we are keenly focusing on because that would spark a lot of new growth and depending upon those markets. So that plays into it. And of course, any companies that are in the marketplace that are expanding and growing, same thing. Mm-hmm. We know that helps us. We take it back and work very closely with our network group and let them know that there's going to be a spike in this particular market because there's a factory opening up and it's going to drive a lot on a continuous basis. Or if it's a short term. So we can adjust. We have the ability to swing up and swing down with some of these opportunities as they come about. So,
And Joe from the airport, and you and your team frequently make calls on the airlines armed with your own data about what your needs are, what the demand is here, and try to align that with the airlines. And
We do, Marla, and Delta we've spent a lot of time with Delta. We have a team, and they're here, David Whitaker, Todd, and Betsy. You guys can wave again. I keep recognizing people, and also Jordan Miller is here from our board, too. That's all that they do, really. It's hard work. David's been around the world. I've been around the world in the few months that I've been here. David spent 3 weeks outside of the country. That's all they do. They work day and night with the airlines to make sure that Columbus is undeniable. That's really what their mission is. And honestly, we work with Columbus 2020 in the partnership, and there's been great support from that organization as we chase new flights. And I can tell you that every flight that's out there, every destination, that everybody in this room, there's a destination that you all want. We are focusing on a few. We're focusing on Europe, and we're focusing on the West Coast. But I can tell you that our folks, our team, my coworkers work on this every single day to bring new flights to this airport.
Remind us, what are a couple of the specific markets that have the most passengers per day each way and do not currently have nonstop service? Seattle is up there, right?
So we've been working very hard on Seattle. We've been working hard, again, on Europe. San Diego we're working on the West Coast, but the West Coast is very attractive to us, and of course Delta's flying to LA, thank you very much. Southwest is flying to Oakland. We are working on the West Coast. We want to make sure that we get travelers to the West Coast, but I can tell you that nothing is off the table. Our team works on all destinations all the time.
Mm-hmm. And West Coast not only for the direct traffic, but people use that then to go on to Asia and other places, correct?
I'm looking at David, but Seattle and San Francisco are two really big key locations for us. But yes, it's all about, as I heard from my friend from Delta, it's all about the spoke and the hubs and getting people to different places.
Mm-hmm. And on the, going back for a minute to the cargo side, Debbie, could you give us a quick idea? I think the other piece of the cargo business that is interesting that many of us might not be aware of is the radiating impact. So you're creating jobs here, obviously, for people that are dealing with the logistics and working in the warehouse. But why is developing this cargo business and the traffic at Rickenbacker good for the region? How does it have an impact beyond your immediate business?
I would say that it helps us move cargo around our network to help people in other places, other distribution centers and things like that. I think from talking to my air freight partners, they are looking at some of the more congested hubs around the country, like O'Hare, like JFK, and then looking at how easy it is to get in and out of Rickenbacker. And they're looking at, doing break bulk for cargo here. If you've got cargo going to Pittsburgh or Cincinnati, bypass O'Hare, come into Rickenbacker, and then move your cargo out from there. So it provides those types of jobs as well, and moves freight much faster.
Well, and that's an interesting point, that having companies here that are heavy users of the airport and attracting flights, then other companies see if there's capacity there or a growth opportunity, then it helps attract other companies in that space, too.
Yes, and the David's team have been great at attracting outbound cargo, because we can't have all inbound cargo coming in here and those planes empty leaving from here. So, all of the industry, manufacturing, horses, you name it, they have been developing the outbound lanes just as heavily as the inbound. So I think it really makes for a great, fully used facility.
Looking out to the next few years, what would you say are there changes coming that are going to maybe impact the way that airlines compete for service, or the amount or type of service that a non-hub airport like Columbus gets? David and Joe, maybe that's something you could take turns at.
So it's a great question. air travel is continuing, honestly, we had this conversation this morning, air travel is continuing to grow. We need to continue getting the aircraft to the right location. So it's all about flying and moving people around. So we're very interested in a European destination because we want to get the traffic out through the other portions of Europe and Africa and Asia and the Middle East. But air traffic in the short term really is a growth industry, and it's about us being competitive. And as David said, we need to make sure, we talk about this all the time, we talk about securing flights, but flights need to be supported. And what we've talked about is the continual support of this community for flights. I talked a little bit about Columbus 2020. We've been trying to work with Ohio University. We've worked with Ohio State University. We've worked with, the Ohio State University. I apologize, I'm a Spartan. I'm taking some time getting used to that. But thank you, the Ohio State University, for what you do for this community. But it really is about, for us, it's about growth. It's about moving passengers. It's about making sure we can support the flights that when our folks go to Delta or Southwest or any of the airlines and convince them to fly and work with them and provide the incremental support through the economic development growth, how we can support those flights. And what we want to see is we want to break through to Europe. We talked a little bit about Pittsburgh is upgauging their flight to Europe soon. We want to make sure that we get in the door, that we continue upgauging, get additional flights. And when Columbus can prove, and I can guarantee you that Columbus can prove that we can support an international flight, there's no end to what we're going to accomplish here.
That's interesting. I'll take off on that in a minute, but I should just mention in just a few minutes we'll take questions too. So if people want to think about getting to the microphone over here, if you do have a question for one of our panelists. And David, when Joe mentioned that it's very competitive to get flights, you spoke about the fact that all of your decisions now are based on data. A lot of cities we see putting up revenue guarantees or other forms of economic incentives for new flights. How important is that? What I've heard previously is that it's not going to make you put in a flight if you wouldn't have otherwise, but how important is that sort of thing in the mix?
Let me address it from the international piece, because that is, there's different markets out there, many different markets that would love to have internationals, and as Joe indicated, is very important. It's a key piece to have. In Delta is, we have a hub operation. Just all of our international, for the most part, is out of the hub. Mm-hmm. Then we started going out and looking at opportunities where communities have come to us and they said, listen, we want it. Pittsburgh is the example that I'll use. And we knew that we could not launch it and have it profitable. It goes back to my earlier comment that it's a very expensive piece of equipment. We need to deploy it where we can get the revenues and sustain it going forward. So there was the revenue guarantees, to a point where we knew we couldn't, it's going to take a while to build up a flight, and we knew it would be too much of a loss to build it up, and so they came back and they gave the revenue guarantees. So the good news is, and it came out, it played out, we got to a point where it was able to sustain itself, and now it's seasonal operation, so that works. So on the international, because it takes a lot of equipment and the length of haul and the economics with that airplane is extremely expensive. That's why it's typically dedicated to a hub, so we can feed it from all over into a hub. So for it to be a local originating flight, there's a lot of people that have to go on that flight day in and day out, or whatever the market number of days. So we've had a lot of discussion, and they're moving in the right direction. So we're really excited about that, with something that could potentially happen out of Columbus going forward. And it's with Joe and the support of the community that we can look at sometime in the not too far future, but there's still other things to address on that front. And
we're working on tomorrow, sorry.
Tomorrow?
Can we load that flight tomorrow?
We load it tomorrow. If we can get it full every day, I think we can make it happen. But
with all respect to Delta, Delta would have to invest something like $45 million. The number is between $45 and $50 million to operate a flight annually to Europe. So it's a very expensive proposition. There's a lot of risk to the airlines. Delta has been very supportive, as some of the other airlines have been, about trying to make Columbus work. So we do appreciate your commitment to trying to make Columbus work. And again, I'm going to speak for the group out here. I guarantee you that if we get that flight, we're going to support it.
I'm excited. I will share one piece of news because everybody wants to know what is going to happen, what's growing, how is Delta or airlines in general growing out of Columbus. And we have right now, looks like for 2019, we have plans to launch Salt Lake City service out of here. So all goes well. That's on the radar screen. We're excited about that. So.
That's great. So I have a short statement I'm supposed to read to people about the questions. It's CMC's tradition to take audience questions. Please state your name and ask your question. In fairness to all, we'd like to get to as many questions as possible, so please avoid editorial comments. Let's get started, please.
My name is Hugo Trooks. I'm a charter member. This question and comment is for David. We're aware of how state of Georgia is punishing you for your NRA decision, and we'd like to invite you to move your headquarters out of Delta and come up here to Columbus. And my question is, what are you doing about that incident?
Well, thank you for the offer. We appreciate it. We need a few more runways and a lot of space. I'm sorry, I missed the last part of your question as far as what is Delta doing about the whole Georgia political situation? We are, Delta, as we looked at this, and of course it did hit the news, and Delta is, it's a stance we're looking at. We cannot be bought, basically. That's our position on the matter with the, and what happened with it. Sure, it did impact us on the fuel taxes, but that is not going to buy and change our decision. We support the Second Amendment. That's not the case. So it is Delta's position, and we're just looking at if there's businesses out there, different types of areas that are questionable, then Delta has the right to look at it and say we just prefer not to do business with that entity. Thank you.
Please, go ahead.
My name is Lee Martin. As a general aviation pilot, I appreciate flying in and out of Bolton, and I would like to ask Mr. Nardone what the plans are for that facility in the future.
So great question. We are looking very closely at Bolton. Bolton is, of course, has some FAA grant money involved in it, and we are working with some different options on Bolton, but Bolton will remain open if that's the question.
Go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Marcellus Upshaw. This is for Joe. With the continued growth here in Columbus, and I looked through the brochure and saw a lot of exciting things there. Is there a level of interest for a potential Sky Club or a lounge at the airport, Delta in particular?
Yes, yes, and yes. As we continue, and hopefully our team, as I said, has worked very, very hard, and they worked on a lot of this stuff years and years and years before they ever heard my name. So thank you for all of that hard work. But yes, that's an amenity that's required. I think that may come with a European flight or potentially an Asian flight, but it really is about those kinds of long-haul air flights. So yes, we'd love to have it, and yes, with the support of one of the wonderful airlines that we have flying in and out of Columbus, or potentially a new airline, although my philosophy is let's focus on the folks we have. They're the ones that are being very good to us. I think a Sky Club is in the future of Columbus.
Okay. Go ahead, please.
Hi, my name's Trip Lazarus. I don't know who this is directed to, but if you would just kind of look towards the future, maybe 20 years or so. I know the airport has been recently renovated, and there was talk of that lasting until, 2030 or something, and then it will be due for something else. And I just want to, get all of your consideration of what you think the freight and passenger airport situation looks like 20 years from now.
Personally, I think there's no end in sight from my point of view to the growth of air cargo. It's primarily driven by e-commerce business. The e-commerce giants Alibaba and Amazon can actually ship orders direct from Asia to a customer in the United States, and if the order is valued at less than $800, they pay no duty. Lots of companies are tagging onto this idea and shipping into the United States from Vancouver, from Toronto, from the UK. So I think that's driving a lot of capacity demand in the in air freight, and we're not keeping up with demand. Another problem that's going to be with us for a while is truck driver shortages and lack of capacity in over-the-road trucking. Until the driverless trucks get here, we're going to continue to have a problem. And because Columbus is so close to so many key distribution hubs, people are going to want to use this area to shield themselves from the risks of trucking, right? If I come into Chicago or Atlanta or JFK, I've got to depend on a truck to get the goods to my DC. So here, within the state, you can be 18 and drive a truck. There's lots of ways to get cargo 20 miles down the road from Rickenbacker. So I think those two things are going to continue to drive the demand for air cargo in central Ohio.
Anything on passenger capacity?
I can answer that question,
Yeah.
Marla. So I think that we have the infrastructure certainly at Rickenbacker to accept a whole lot more flights. So Rickenbacker is a great growth opportunity, and traveling to Asia with Mr. Whitaker, we got a lot of attention about Rickenbacker. That is a super growth area. So as it relates to John Glenn International, we are limited by the terminal. As everyone knows, there are plans for a new terminal, but I can tell you that we are looking very closely on what that will look like. Growth is the forecast. So growth is forecast in the airline industry, and growth certainly here, as you can see by the support by the new industry, by the population growth. There's nowhere else to go but up. But we need to make sure that we provide the facilities, particularly in the terminal, for our passengers.
My name's Kip Kelsey, and this question is directed to you, Mr. Nardone.
Joe, please.
There's plans for a new terminal building at Port Columbus. My question most specifically is, when do you expect that to take place, and where in relation to Lane Aviation?
So I'm going to give you a non-answer here because I've only been here less than 4 months. I can tell you that this is a high priority, and we are looking at the terminal piece literally every day. Shanetta Griffin, who's here, can you wave Shanetta? Shanetta came here to build a terminal, so she's very interested in it, is working now on the new consolidated rental car facility, which will be just slated to construction be started later this year. All things, if everything works out on that. But I really don't have a specific answer. There were a couple of triggers that have been considered. There's certainly financial considerations, and there's certainly airline considerations. The thing that people don't really understand about this business, particularly the airport business, is the airlines pay the bills ultimately. So we have to have great relationships with our airlines. We have to be transparent with them, and we have to work through any kind of growth that we have with our airlines.
Go ahead.
David, Delta. Question, in the big picture with Delta, your marketing code share agreements with your alliance partners, how big of a part of Delta's business and how important is that to Delta in moving into the future?
Thank you for the question. Delta, our partners, our code shares is extremely important because we realized a long time ago that Delta cannot provide service from anywhere to everywhere. And we can't fly to many places around the globe, so it was all focused then on aligning ourselves with the right partners. The big difference between Delta and some of our competition is that Delta goes into, when you hear the word JV, joint venture, it is a different relationship than just a code share because we, in essence, get the approvals from the various governments that give us the ability to open up and share in the revenues and the cost of a market. So Air France, as an example, to Europe, everything that goes across the pond, it doesn't matter if it flies on Air France or flies on Delta or flies on KLM, because at the end of the day, we all take how much it costs to operate it, and then we share how much the profits were, and we split it 50-50. So it's the best thing, closest thing to a merger than you can get without being a merger. So we've invested, we own 49% of Aeromexico. We own 49% of Virgin Atlantic. We have just an equity, now we have an ownership in Air France. We have ownership in Gold, 10%. We have ownership in China Eastern. We have board seats on their board. That gives us the ability to expand and these partnerships accelerate globalization. And we're so focused on that in 2018 more now than ever before. To answer the one point of your question, how much of it? I think our total revenues linked to international, be it transatlantic, transpacific, or Latin America, is around 35%, give or take. So you can see, and it's going to continue to grow because that's where business is continuing to evolve around the globe, and we want to be able to provide that service from anywhere to anywhere. And so the partnerships are extremely important.
Good afternoon. My name is Donnie Perkins. I'm the Chief Diversity Officer for the College of Engineering at The Ohio State University. And knowing full well that talent is one of your key assets, the question I have for all three of you would be, what are your organizations doing to enhance the diversity of your leadership teams and your entire workforce? Second part of the question, what are you doing to enhance minority, supplier, and women organizations' participation as well? Thank you.
I'm actually really happy you asked that question. That's been one of our priorities since I got here, and I will say that I came to Columbus to be introduced on December 12th, and I said two things about our management team. They're large, and they're also not very diverse. So we talk about this every day. We have our human resources people are working on diversity initiatives. Quite honestly, I'll just tell it like it is. We have work to do. And we have work to do as it relates to attracting small businesses and diverse businesses and women-owned businesses. Working with airports, it's a very difficult thing to do. We just hosted a very large event for approximately 150, 200 people, Shanetta, to try and bring diverse businesses into the potential CONRAC project that we're, as I said, hoping to start at the end of this year. It's a priority. It's something we work on every day, and I appreciate you asking the question.
And again, and thank you for asking that question. I'm also I participate as part of the Social Responsibility Council at Ascena that was formed last November, and I'm responsible for diversity and inclusion committees in the supply chain area of our business. We're forming associate groups to raise issues and help us decide what specific areas that we would like to pursue. One of them will definitely be pursuing diverse suppliers, especially in the trucking, transportation, and distribution area of the business. But frankly, we are just getting started with some of these initiatives, and I think there'll be very good things to come this year.
Yeah, and again, thank you for the question. On the Delta side, we have currently our employee base is about 80,000 worldwide, and over the next 5 years, we will be hiring 5,000 people a year. That's a significant number. And at the top of that, we're looking for the best, the brightest, the most talented individuals to bring into our organization so we can continue to provide the best service in the industry. And diversity is absolutely paramount, and making sure that we have the right diverse group, looking at it from the top down. So our CEO, Ed Bastian, that is a focus that he has had, not just recently, but he has had that. And we're taking all the steps that we need to take in order to ensure we have the diversity aspect of it covered from top down.
Do we have time for one more question? Okay.
Dave Williams, Ohio State University. I'm delighted to hear of the plans to make John Glenn International a more international university airport. We have over 6,000 international students, most of whom fly in and out of John Glenn International. There are over 400 Japanese companies in Ohio, which probably do likewise. Is there something we can do to make them feel more welcome when they arrive, because the only language they're greeted in is English?
Absolutely. So let's take this offline, and we'll visit with you after the discussion. And of course, I came from Detroit, which is an international airport, and we had a lot of different languages spoken. I would guess, without being able to say this because I'm relatively new, that we have done some work on those issues. David, somebody from our group, let's talk after this, and would be really interested in talking to you about that. But I do also want to say that the university has also been supportive in this quest to get an international flight, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Please help me thank our supporters and partners, the Dispatch Media Group, Columbus Landmark Foundation, and Preserving Original Columbus Airport Terminal. And let's thank our speakers, Joe Nardone, David Stratchko, Debbie Ryan, Marla Rose, and Nancy Recchie. And thanks to all of you for being here. We look forward to seeing you next week.